Okay.
Thanks, guys. My name is Summer, and I'm an alcoholic, and I have Jedi David here tonight with us. We're on the bottom of page 45. Thank you all for being here. Sorry for the inconvenience. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us had been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. I'd love to hear your input on this, David.
Yeah, sure. So, one of the nice things I like about this paragraph is Bill, his writing varies a lot as we go through the book, but I'm a bit of a student of writing, right? This is what I have my college degree in. So I try to be attuned to stylistically what's being done and how Bill is approaching the content. And there's a little bit of sort of romance here towards the end of the paragraph, like look at what he's presenting, and as we were chatting before we started the recording, Bill's really in this chapter going to be putting this a little bit of this sort of, fishing and selling effort to bring us in, to try to let us, get our guard down and become willing to consider that there's something bigger out there that's going to save our tails, right? And so in this paragraph, he's trying to relate to the reader, right? Oh, we know how he feels. We shared his honest doubt and prejudice. And then he goes into these real, I think, ideas and prejudices that a lot of us carry in. Like, how can there be a God, right? When we've got warring individuals and warring theological systems, right? All the religious strife and inexplicable calamity, all the terrible things that happen to the planet. So we look at this with deep skepticism, like we question, how can there be this great loving being with all this bad stuff? How can there be a God who kills puppies and mamas, right? Things like that. But then he's saying, okay, we get that. But also, what about the beautiful things that we see in this world, right? What are we attributing that to? Are we just taking all the bad stuff and trying to play pin the tail on the bad donkey? Who can we give credit to, right? How can we balance this out? So he's trying to coax us into a little bit and say, we get it. We've been there. We know what it's like to have all these prejudices and old ideas, but let's take a look at some of the beautiful things too.
Love it. And for me, it was the same. This exactly it. And like, not to get into all of my experience and whatnot, but I love how you said, like, I mean, he wrote this in 1939, or but a little bit before that, right? And he already knew like where we'd be at in life now. Like, I mean, in this world with all the stuff that's going on and all of the things that like are happening, it's so easy to just be like, where is God in all of this, or what is going on, or like things that may have happened in my life or my experience. Like, it's easy to put a like a generalization on, there can't be a God. There can't be a God. Like, why would he allow this to happen to me, or whatever, whatever situation went on. Like, there cannot be a God if, when innocent people are suffering, or whatever it is. And how could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? Here Bill's asking these questions, and I love it. And who could comprehend a supreme being? Like, who could ever comprehend? That was if I can't understand it, what's the point? So if who could ever comprehend this, I'm not going to go there. Like, you mean I have to like start studying and like learn about it and like find out more? Yes, we do. But it was easy to just be like, I mean, who could really comprehend like a supreme being making all of the galaxies or, you know, the
Mm-hmm.
world or whatever it is. And but then when we come and we're on this starlit night,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, who made all of this? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you know, the beauty and all of that, there was a feeling of awe and wonder. But guess what? Then it got lost. Isn't that such the
Mm.
alcoholic? Like all of a sudden
Right.
we're like, oh my gosh, this is
Like, nah,
so
I'm
beautiful.
over it. Right. I'm gonna go
Yeah. And
back to the
then
negative.
over it, like, you know, I mean, that's, yeah, he's writing about us, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Do you have anything else to comment on that?
No, I just want to set up these next four paragraphs though, real
Hmm.
quick. I think these are my four favorite paragraphs in this chapter because Bill is killing himself in this next page to let us know how easy it is for me to begin my spiritual awakening. He's going to give me every opportunity. He's going to launch up beach balls for me to hit with my baseball bat. All I have to do is listen and read, and I'm going to see how easy it is and how quickly I can legitimately start to get better, to get healthier.
Hmm. Awesome. Awesome. All right, here we go. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences, kind of what we were just talking about. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God.
Mm,
So we found as number one, when we lay aside the prejudice, number two, we express a willingness. And then number three is down in the next paragraph, we were never exclusive, or we earnestly seek. So those are the three, you know, prerequisites. We find out that once we lay all those old ideas, those prejudices aside, that's beginning, and we're beginning to be able to open ourselves up to a power greater than ourselves, express a willingness to believe in this, and then earnestly seek that power. What does that look like? That's action. It's seek is like, I think of my kids playing hide and seek, and you know how, you know, desperate they are to find each other, and they're like screaming around, going here and there and looking under the bed and looking, you know, behind the clothes. And you know, I would try to do the hide and seek as well. Like if we can actively seek a God with that same enthusiasm and that same um I don't know what another word, enthusiasm, then we're good to go,
mm,
right? Once we start laying aside the prejudices of God. And I just want to, you know, I wanted to mention this in the other paragraph, but I was upset that I didn't press the recording. But one way that we can lay aside the prejudices of God is through inventory. And I found, when I found that out in my fourth step, that I could have a resentment against God and that I was
mm,
still okay. You know, that was another thing. It was like, well, maybe you have, when my sponsor said to me, maybe you have, you know, an old idea or prejudice or a resentment against God. I was like, whoa, there's no way that, you know, I'm spiritual now. I'm on step 4, right? Like, so, so I thought there's no way.
mm,
And when I was able to complete a full inventory on the prejudices and the belief systems and the ways that I felt about God, honestly, I was able to get free of that. And
mm,
you know, step 4, and to be quite honest, step 10 as well. You know, we practice personal inventory on a daily basis, right? And honestly, you know, sometimes a prejudice has come, or an old belief system will creep on back, right? Like I'll have a different belief system, like how could this happen, like I was talking about before, but it will come up again in my daily life today.
mm,
And written inventory is an excellent tool to be free of that. So David, you're
mm.
on.
Yeah, so for me, the key sentence here, and this is what I was talking about introducing these next four paragraphs, is the paragraph that says, we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. And I'll just gonna stop there without reading the complete sentence. And I think, a lot of times we read this as Some of you were saying prerequisites or conditions that are independent from each other. One is to lay aside prejudice, and two is to express even a willingness. I contend that maybe those are actually two conjoined thoughts, that
Mhm.
the expressing the willingness to believe
Mhm.
where I was never willing before is automatically me laying aside some prejudice, because my prejudice is everything that I bring into recovery, right? It's all my prejudgments, it's all my old stuff, all my history, all those things that are rotten in my gut. And so the proposition to me here is not, well, David, um, do you believe there's a power greater than yourself that's going to save your tail? That's not what's being asked here. What's being asked is, David, are you willing to believe? I mean, Bill is just giving us such an easy in here. Being willing to believe. It's just, I mentioned again before we started recording that we did a second step meeting with a new guy last weekend, and I brought this concept up. I just said, all I want to know, man, is not do you believe in God? Now, will you believe in God at some point?
Mhm.
But are you willing to imagine that it's possible that maybe one day you could believe in a higher power? Like, I'm watering it so far down. And that's really what Bill is telling us here. Right. And the fact that he goes on to say it's impossible for us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God, that seems like a fool's errand. Why do I need to fully comprehend or define God? Here's the starting place for me. Am I God? No. Is there something bigger than me that could be this thing that could save my tail? Yes. And again, 20 plus years hence, I've got lots of evidence to say that there is this God that's working in my life. I still don't know what he, she, it is, where they are. Actually, take it back. I know exactly where they are. They're in my belly. But what I mean is, it's not floating up on some cloud. That's not my vision of what my higher power is, right? But this was such an easy hook for me early, because I just have to be willing to believe. I make no commitment here for a timetable or the depth of my belief once I have it, just that
Mhm.
I'm willing to imagine that one day maybe there's something here for me. And the promise is, if I can do this, I commence to get results. Well, what are those results? Ultimately, it's the totality of me beginning my spiritual awakening that's promised in the 12th step. I think there's a lot of people who are confused that they think they take all these steps, they do all this work, and then there's this waterfall moment. And it's like, oh, and I have my spiritual awakening when I formally work my 12th step for the first time. Has not been my experience of me and the people that, my peers in recovery. The spiritual awakening starts in step 2 for me, and it gets wider in 3 and really wide in 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. Right? It's almost like that upside down triangle for our service structure is happening in our recovery experience too. It starts very narrow and it broadens, and that should be my experience, because as I travel through the steps, as I start to get better and get closer to God, right, in my relationship, then it adds to that enthusiasm that makes me want to jump into that next step. You know?
Awesome. Thank you. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider
Mm.
conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, capital C, I, a spirit of the universe, capital S and U, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek.
Mm.
It is open, we believe, to all men. Isn't that, I mean, that first sentence is awesome, that, thank goodness, like, we don't have to, we find out, we find out that we don't need to consider someone else's. So I don't have to adopt David's conception of
Mm.
God. I don't have to, I don't have to, believe in the same God or higher power that Jamie does.
Mhm.
It's about the conception that I consider, right? And our own
Mhm.
conception, even if it's inadequate. So even if it is not like where we're at when we finish the steps, or however it is at this time, like I said, hopefully this is step 2, you're reading this, and you know however inadequate, it's sufficient, it's good, it's okay, it's gonna work, um to make an approach and to affect a contact with him. So, all we have to do is admit. I like that, because all we have to do is admit that there's a possibility, and be willing to be willing to be willing to be willing that there is one. That's all.
Mhm.
Just a
Mhm.
possibility. And however we want to describe our higher power, the power must be greater than, like we were talking about before the before we started recording. It has to be greater than the power of alcohol, and the power that we was ruling our lives, the power of self, all of those, the spirit. It has to be greater than ourselves, than self,
Mhm.
because we have lack of power is our problem.
Mhm.
And so a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, those are all awesome, awesome realm of the spirit. There's a lot. My sponsor had me go through We Agnostics and write all of the synonyms for God, all of
Mhm.
the uppercase, references to God that wasn't God, and write those down. Maybe one of those would be for me, because when I didn't know. I wasn't ready. And that's where I was at. And she had me write down all of those. And there was a lot. And I started out with um, creator,
Mm.
creator. And it's evolved from there. David?
Yeah. I think what I love the most in this paragraph, again, I talked about how Bill's just making it easy for us here,
Mm-hmm.
is as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, I don't have to admit the existence, just the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps, right? There's more steps beyond this one. But he's launching us a beach ball to hit with our baseball bat here. He's making it so easy. He's just saying, you don't have to say there's God. There's not going to be a pledge as I'm sitting down with somebody I'm taking through the steps and we're getting into step 2. It's not like I tackle him if he's trying to leave the door without pledging himself to God. It just doesn't work that way. I do need him to say, hey, man, is it possible? Now, listen, if somebody is completely shut down and says, no, not willing, not possible, no nothing, it's going to be tough for us to move on. Now, I'm going to still do my best, because those are the will nots, right? We got the cannots and the will nots. And so those are like the will nots. I will not believe this. Times we can make a convincing sort of demonstration as we go, so it's not a disqualification, but it's going to make it tougher, if people are just going to put on these absolute brakes. I don't know how Bill could make it any easier for us. He says, hey, man, just express a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves. And then in this paragraph, he says, just admit there's a possible existence. Those adjectives that he's using and adverbs to modify to make it easy is so beautifully done on his part. Think about the book that Bill could have written, right? He could have said, remember, AA came out of the Oxford group. It doesn't mean that they were on the same mission, but who were their peers in the Oxford group? They were people trying to practice first century Christianity, right? It's a very sort of devout, fundamentalist approach to a religion. Bill could have gotten consumed with that. That could have been his experience. He could have said, you must take Christ as your savior, right? He could have been very cut and dry. You must, put yourself down and pray 3 times a day and in this fashion and say these things. But he didn't. He just said, there's something bigger, maybe. And if you can say maybe to it, you're going to be well on your way. Well on your way to what? On your way to a spiritual awakening.
Awesome. You want to read the next paragraph on 47, David?
Sure, happy to.
Thank you.
When therefore we speak to you of God, oh, this is so important, right? We mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. At the start, this is my favorite sentence in this paragraph. At the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I'm
Yeah.
reading and editorializing here. Okay, sure. So, I stopped it and popped out in that first sentence. So, when therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. So, this is an easier statement to make to the agnostic than the atheist, right? But I think it's an important concept, idea to float to everybody. Whether somebody comes in with a history in religion, raised with some, but not into it, maybe got found religion and they appreciate it. There's many different flavors. Some people who had no religious, we all have these ideas and prejudices about the word God, right? And that's what Bill is just stressing to us so much over and over. But this is our own conception. And sometimes I think it comes up, people want to be combative about this. Well, what do you mean my own conception? I can make my own God. And we've heard some crazy stuff in the rooms of recovery over the years. This doorknob can be your higher power, or this chair. And it's like, well, hold on a second here, right? Those are not the conceptions of God that we're talking about here, right? Has to be a power greater than ourselves. Do you know how many whacks of a hammer or a mallet it takes to smash a doorknob off a door? Probably 3, right? Like, we need things that are bigger, stronger, mightier than us, right? But that's the kind of God that we're talking about. But we still get to conceive and define it on our own. And then he goes on to say this applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. So, what are some of the other spiritual expressions you find in this book? Well, we use the word prayer and pray a ton in this book, right? So, lots of prejudices about what we think that means. Oh, my wife is coming home, so my 6 dogs are going to go ballistic. So, if it gets noisy, just bear with me a minute. So pray and prayer, those feel like spiritual expressions. And how about other things, right? Like the broad highway, right? And there's other nice sort of beautiful language like this. So what does that mean? Well, it means what it means to me. And he's just warning me, like, don't let these old ideas that I have about these spiritual terms keep me from getting healthy, right? This is the whole point, is I'm starting to get better. And then the sentence I pointed out is my favorite one in this paragraph. It's another letting me know how easy things can be. At the start, this is all I needed, laying aside of that prejudice. If I can just do that, let a little of that go, then I'm going to commence spiritual growth. Spiritual growth towards what? Spiritual growth towards my spiritual awakening. And this is, of course, going to affect my first conscious relation with God as I understand Him. It's just saying, David, get out of the way. Just get out of the way. Just be a little open-minded. Just be a little willing. Crack the door, and I can get to God through it.
Yeah. Oops. That's awesome. I mean, and at the start, this is all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood Him. So at the start, like where we're at the beginning, wherever we're at in the program, to be quite honest. So at the beginning of our seeking a higher power, it's like, this is all we need. And I love how you keep bringing up, David, that Bill is making it easy on us. He's saying, this is all you need. Like, and afterwards, guess what? After that happens, we find ourselves accepting things that we thought were completely out of reach. And that's the beginning of growth. And that's applicable for other areas of our life too, like things that seem so out of reach. But once we start and we just make that step and that first umph and we go,
Hmm.
it's beyond what we could have even imagined. So we use that the conception that we had, however limited it was. It doesn't, I mean, no matter how limited, how small, how crazy, but not the doorknob, like David said, it has to be greater than ourselves. But it can be limits as far as, I mean, the way that I perceive this is however limited it is. It's not that the power is limited, it's that our conception of the power is limited,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yes.
Okay.
And,
All
and
right.
and just to sort of double and triple down on this, I brought this concept up already of what this program could have been, right? And I said, well, what if Bill had made us all be devout Christians, or or Orthodox Jews, or hardcore Muslims, or pick your religion? He could have said this is the solution, and we probably would have been on board. It could have been crazier than just observing a fundamental religion. What if he had said, we must sleep on a bed of nails? We must swallow broken glass. Uh, they could have said at my first meeting, David, if you murder a stranger in an alley, that's our solution. You'll be absolved of the drink problem. Wouldn't I have been willing to do things way crazier than what Bill is asking us to do? Yes,
Mhm.
because I was desperate, right? On what's he saying? He's saying, hey, admit that you're not God and that you need to find God, and then go make right how you were a jerk for 30 years, and then spend the rest of your days taking care of God's kids. That's the program, right? It's not like, it's not a lot of sacrifice. The only sacrifice is self, which, by the way, needs to get the hell out of here, right? Because it's just killing me. It's eating me up from the inside out. This is so much easier. Be a little willing. Lay aside a little prejudice. You know, think about things a different way, and we promise you're going to get better. What a deal! Rick, you can't get that deal anywhere else on this planet. Only in 12-step recovery.
Mhm. Have a perception change,
Mm-hmm.
shift, right?
Absolutely.
We needed to ask ourselves, I'm on the second paragraph of 47. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself? That's it. As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or he says that he's willing to be willing, I'm sorry, or is willing to believe.
That too.
Yeah, I know I say that, but I don't want to
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, screw anyone up it's not in the big book, but or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built.
Mm.
And then the asterisk is for spiritual experience, which is in the back in the appendix. And
Mm.
David, if we discuss this paragraph, do you think we have time to do the spiritual experience?
We can. You might want to double back on it next week, though. Let's
Okay.
just let's see where it takes us. You want to
Okay.
go first this time, or you want me to?
You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so this is the first really big proposition, question, right? To consider, the stated question to consider, right?
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, second one. First one was, where and how am I going to find that power? This is the second one. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there's a power greater than myself? So what have we done in these last four paragraphs? Well, Bill's trying to disarm us. He's trying to relate to us. He's saying, we understand, we thought the same way, we got it, and what our experience has been. Not just saying, hey, man, you need to do this, but rather, our experience has been that when we laid aside some prejudice and just became willing to believe, and we became willing to conceive, we started to get better. We started to straighten out spiritually, which we have to do first, right? We got to get better spiritually before we can hope to straighten out mentally or physically. So, based on that, he's sort of culminating here in this fourth paragraph saying, do I now believe? And it's okay if somebody says no. Or am I even willing to believe that there's a power greater than myself? I mean, listen, if I understand the first step, then I learned that I'm powerless. So if I am powerless, And if I learned, because it's talked, it's in the book, and I talk to the people I take to the steps about it, is human power being able to help you in the past? Is human reliance failing you? And of course it is, right? People don't come into AA or CA or the other A's when they've got other options. As far as I know, we're always still the last stop in town, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so people are not able to help us ourselves, wives, husbands, kids, parents, neighbors, friends, lovers, right? Doctors, lawyers, judges, cops. They can't help us. So if that's the case, I better at least be willing to believe that there's some grand poobah out there greater than me that can save my tail. And here's the beautiful promise. God, he's making it so easy for us. If I can just say that I believe or willing
Mhm.
to believe, I'm emphatically assured that I'm on my way. On my way to what? On my way to a spiritual awakening as the result, the singular result of working these steps. He goes on to say it's been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. And I'm sure if you've been around a little bit, you've seen people have these, Google it online if you haven't, like Cornerstone, or, the Arch Recovery. And you see like the top,
Mhm.
the keystone is the third step. And then you got step one's the foundation, and you got step two is the foundation stone in the corner. People do these beautiful things and get tattoos of it. Bill uses these building analogies because his maternal grandfather, who raised him, because his mom went to medical school and all this, so she dropped Bill with her dad and said, "Raise this boy as if he's your own." Right? He was a builder, and so that's why Bill has all these building, metaphors and analogies that he uses throughout the book. Um, and it's neither here nor there. It's just one of his literary techniques that he uses, but I think it's people like them, and I'll speak for myself. I like it because it feels very tangible to me. Like this is a very
Mhm.
fixed thing. If I believe in this, if I believe in my willingness to believe, then the next step I need to take is based on this, right? It's going to be firm. It's going to give me a good launching, jumping off point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Um, so here we are, like a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built and will be can be built. But
Mm-hmm.
um backing up to the beginning or in the middle of the paragraph, as soon as a man says that he does believe or is willing to believe, and as I kind of got in there and said, or willing to be willing, we can assure them, we can assure our prospect or assure whoever we're talking to that he's on his way. So as soon, like right away, as soon as he says that he's willing to believe or willing to be willing, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's time to assure him and that he's well on his way, like we're ready to go, like let's go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we're
Mm-hmm.
not going to be like, oh, okay, you're willing to, like, let's sit for a little bit and like maybe you can lull over it in your mind for a couple more weeks, or get an actual thing. I mean, at least for me, it was like quick. As soon as I was able to answer that question, it was like on to step 3.
Mm.
Is that your experience too, David?
Yeah, I mean, I moved swiftly through the first steps, and I move people swiftly through the first steps. I know that I've got friends and peers who sponsor a lot of people, and they'll whip them through all 3 steps in a matter of an hour, a few hours. The first day they're working with them. That's not my typical approach, but I like to get them through the first 3 steps in a week because I
Mhm.
just assume, and it's usually borne out after a little talking, that we got
Mhm.
to get to that fourth step.
Yeah.
My sponsor, and he hadn't been sober a real long time, and he wasn't a big book thumper, but he had a good passing understanding of steps. He'd been sober about a year and a half. He got to know me over a couple conversations. He's like, "Man, you got to get to the fourth step," right? Because all he did every time we talked was heard me talk about that, right, and all my resentments and all my anger and all my fear and all the terrible, relationships I was in. He
Yeah.
sussed me out like that. And I took something from that. I believe it today. I've not yet met an alcoholic or an addict who comes into our rooms who is not primed and overflowing, right, with the resentments, the fear, and the sex problems. Right. So let's make sure we've got an understanding 1, 2, and 3. But the way that I take people through the steps, there's no work to do in those first 3 steps. We're going to
Right.
talk. We're going to make sure we've got some comprehension, some understanding. We're going to say a prayer, hold hands on our knees in three, and then let's get
Mhm.
out paper and pen and let's get to writing.
Right. Right. I mean, I think when we first come in, I was exuding the bedevilments. Like, it was just like,
Mhm.
come on, like, like, let's get you to
Yes.
four. But
Yes.
it's like, yeah, it has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, as David described wonderfully, about Bill, using these sort of references, that's for steps. I don't know, keystone, cornerstone,
Mhm.
foundation,
Mhm.
or foundation, cornerstone, keystone.
Mhm.
A wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. How cool is
Mm.
that? Like, we have
Mm.
a spiritual structure is going to be built, and it's just, I love the wording, and I said, I'm sorry, an effective spiritual structure can be built. I don't know if I said effective, like a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. All these descriptive words, it's effective, it's wonderful, and it's spiritual, and that's the way it's going to be built. And that's
Mm.
where we're going to move from here.
Mhm.
And that's like, I think honestly, David, I think since I didn't realize that it was already 8:58.
Good place to stop. Yeah.
Good place to stop, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, I'll stop the recording. And well, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for coming tonight, and I appreciated your knowledge and wisdom, and thank you for being here with us tonight,
Thanks for the
David.
opportunity. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right.